"I'm not clean," the peasant girl whispered, and when the prince saw her scars, his heart stopped. The storm raged outside, thunder shaking the thatched roof. But inside that humble cottage, something far greater struck. A scarred servant girl, trembling by the fire, dared to meet the eyes of a crown prince. He should have turned away, but instead, his soul caught flame. The church bell tolls. Hooves thunder through the mud. Whispers spread through the castle halls. The prince is hiding a peasant girl, marked by fire. But behind her scars lies a secret one that could shatter the crown, or save it. When poison is poured, when chains rattle in the dungeon, and when truth itself is put on trial, only her courage can decide the fate of a kingdom. Will a scarred girl's love bring redemption to the throne or ruin everything he was born to rule? Comment below and tell me where in the world you're joining from. And if this story made you pause for a moment, hit that subscribe button for more thunder. Cracked across the darkening sky as Prince Alaric struggled through the muddy village path. The spring storm had caught him unaware, turning the gentle countryside into a treacherous maze of puddles and slick earth. His fine stallion, usually so sure-footed, had stumbled badly in a hidden hole, leaving the prince to continue on foot while the frightened animal bolted away into the gloom. Rain pelted his face as lightning split the heavens once more. His rich velvet cloak, now torn from catching on a branch, offered little protection against the bitter wind. Each step was a battle as his boots, heavy with mud, threatened to remain stuck in the mire. Pain shot through his ankle where he had landed badly after dismounting. Through the sheets of rain, he spotted a humble cottage, its windows glowing with welcome warmth. Limping heavily now, he made his way to the wooden door and knocked, praying someone would answer. The door creaked open slowly, revealing a young woman who quickly lowered her gaze to the floor. Even in that brief glimpse, Alaric noticed the web of scars that marked one side of her face, trailing down her neck and disappearing beneath her simple dress. Her hands, gripping her apron nervously, bore similar marks. "Please, miss," he said, his voice gentle despite his discomfort. "I've lost my horse in the storm. Might I shelter here until it passes?" She stepped back without meeting his eyes, gesturing toward the hearth where a small fire crackled. "Of course, sir. Please, warm yourself." Her voice was barely above a whisper. Alaric moved closer to the flames, gratefully removing his sodden cloak. The cottage was humble but clean, with dried herbs hanging from the rafters and a few wooden chairs arranged near the fire. The scent of fresh-baked bread filled the small space. The young woman hesitated, then moved to a simple wooden shelf. "I have some bread, sir, if you're hungry. It's only coarse bread. Not what you're used to, I'm sure. Thank you." "That would be most welcome." He accepted the offered slice, noting how she kept her scarred hands hidden in the folds of her skirt. When he smiled at her in genuine gratitude, she seemed startled. "I'm not clean," she whispered, turning her marked face away. "I should not serve you." Alaric studied her more carefully now. Beyond the scars, he saw intelligence in her downcast eyes and gentleness in the way she moved. More than that, he recognized something that spoke of deep courage, the kind that endured daily trials with quiet dignity. "What is your name?" he asked softly. "Annalise, sir." "How did you come by these marks, Annalise?" She wrung her hands together, still not meeting his gaze. The miller's place caught fire. 3 years passed. There were children inside, trapped. Her voice grew even quieter. "I couldn't leave them there. I got them out, but the flames," she trailed off, touching her scarred cheek unconsciously. "And the children. They lived." For the first time, a hint of pride crept into her voice. "Yes, sir. All 4 of them. Yet you speak of these scars as though they shame you. People, they turn away. They whisper. They say I'm marked by misfortune, that I bring bad luck." Pain filled her words. Even those I saved, their parents don't let them near me now. The storm's fury began to ease outside, its thunder growing more distant. In the gentler light of the fire, Alaric rose from his chair, stepping closer to where Annalise stood. With infinite care, he took her scarred hand in his. "These are not marks of shame, Annalise," he said firmly. "They are marks of valor, earned in the noblest cause, saving innocent lives. You bear the proof of your courage on your skin." Her eyes finally lifted to meet his, wonder replacing fear in their depths. And then, like sunshine breaking through storm clouds, a smile transformed her face. It was small and uncertain, as though she had forgotten how to shape such an expression. But it held such genuine beauty that Alaric felt his breath catch in that moment. As the rain softened to a gentle patter on the thatched roof, Prince Alaric realized he was seeing true nobility, not in the marble halls of his palace, but in the scarred face of a brave village girl who had risked everything to save others. The first rays of dawn painted the storm-washed sky in gentle pink and gold. Outside the humble cottage where Annalise lived, villagers gathered in growing clusters, their whispers rising like morning mist. The crown prince himself, sheltering with the miller's daughter, under our very own roofs. Their words mixed with the drip of rain from thatch and the distant call of morning birds. The thunder of hooves broke through the murmurs as a dozen royal guards galloped into the village, their blue and silver uniforms still splattered with mud from their night-long search. Behind them rode Lord Stefan, the royal steward, his usually immaculate appearance marred by the previous night's desperate hunting. Prince Alaric emerged from the cottage, his clothes still damp but his bearing every inch royal. The villagers dropped into hasty bows and curtsies, creating a ripple of movement across the muddy ground. Annalise followed him to the doorway, her scarred hands clasped tightly before her, eyes downcast as custom demanded. "Your Highness?" Lord Stefan dismounted with practiced grace. "We've been searching all night. The entire court is in an uproar. Your betrothal. Negotiations cannot proceed without peace." Lord Stefan, Alaric, raised a hand, his voice firm but kind. "I am well, thanks to the charity of this household." The steward's gaze fell upon Annalise, and his lip curled in obvious distaste. "Surely your Highness jests. This unclean peasant stock dared to touch your royal person. The very thought of it." Silence. Alaric's command cracked like a whip across the morning air. The villagers flinched, and even the horses seemed to stamp nervously. "You will not speak so of one who showed true nobility last night." "This lady is, Lord Stefan. I said lady offered shelter and kindness when I was in need, asking nothing in return." The steward's face flushed red, but he bowed stiffly. "As your Highness says. However, we must return to court immediately. The Bulgarian ambassador awaits." "And the marriage negotiations, indeed." Alaric's shoulders tensed slightly, the weight of duty visible in his stance. He turned to Annalise, who had not moved from her doorway. "I cannot leave you to face further scorn for your kindness to me. Therefore, I decree you shall enter my household as a kitchen made in the palace." Gasps rippled through the watching crowd. Lord Stefan's face grew even redder, but he dared not speak against the prince's direct command. Annalise lifted her eyes for the first time, uncertainty warring with hope in her expression. "But my father, your Highness," she said softly. "He depends upon me." "Your father shall not want," Alaric assured her. "My soldiers will ensure he receives provisions regularly." He gestured to the captain of his guard, who nodded firmly. Annalise glanced back into the cottage where her father still slept, then squared her shoulders with quiet dignity. "Then I accept your Highness's generous offer with gratitude." The next few minutes passed in a blur of activity. Annalise gathered her few belongings in a small bundle while the villagers watched in stunned silence. she approached her father's bedside, tears glimmering in her eyes as she pressed a gentle kiss to his weathered forehead. Lord Stephen waited by the carriage, his disdain evident in every line of his rigid posture. Annalise climbed in beside him, clutching her bundle close. The steward shifted away from her as if her very presence might soil his fine clothes. "Prince," Alaric mounted a fresh horse brought by his guards. "To the palace," he commanded, and the carriage wheels began to turn, crushing new paths in the mud as they rolled toward the distant capital. As they pulled away, Annalise kept her eyes fixed on her father's cottage until it disappeared around a bend in the road, the familiar world of her village life fading into memory with each turn of the wheels. The carriage wheels clattered over cobblestones as Annalise watched the royal city unfold before her. 3 long days of travel had left her weary. The endless silence, broken only by Lord Stephen's occasional disapproving sniffs and the creak of wooden wheels through mud. Now, as morning light spilled across the city's ancient walls, her heart beat faster at the sight of towers reaching toward heaven like giant stone fingers. The streets grew more crowded as they approached the palace. Market stalls lined the roads, filled with colorful fruits and fresh bread that made her mouth water. Fine carriages drawn by matched pairs of horses rolled past, carrying ladies in silk gowns who never glanced at the common folk scurrying out of their way. Church bells rang out across the city, their deep voices echoing off the stone buildings. "Close your mouth, girl," Lord Stephen said sharply. "You look like a simpleton, gaping at everything." Annalise lowered her eyes, her fingers touching the rough fabric of her dress. The scarred skin of her arms seemed to burn under his gaze. When they finally passed through the palace gates, servants rushed to help Lord Stephen from the carriage. No one offered Annalise a hand. She climbed down carefully, trying not to stumble on legs stiff from travel. "To the kitchens with you," Lord Stephen commanded, pointing toward a side entrance. "Master Cook Gertrude will put you to work." The kitchen was a world of steam and noise, filled with the clash of pots and the shouts of cooks preparing the morning meal. Master Cook Gertrude stood like a general commanding her troops, her face red from the heat of huge ovens. "Another one, is it?" Gertrude looked Annalise up and down, her eyes lingering on the scars. "Well, don't just stand there. Those copper pots won't scrub themselves." Annalise found herself kneeling beside a pile of blackened pots taller than she was. The work was hard, but familiar. She had always helped with cooking and cleaning at home. As she scrubbed, she heard the whispers start. "Did you see her face? Poor thing, marked like that? They say she came with the prince himself." 2 young scullery maids worked nearby, stealing glances at her. Finally, one approached with a kind smile. "I'm Mary," she said softly. "Would you like some fresh water for those pots? The pump in the courtyard gives cleaner water than the kitchen barrel." Before Annalise could respond, a familiar voice made her heart skip. "Good morning, Master Cook Gertrude." Prince Alaric stood in the doorway, his presence causing an immediate hush in the kitchen. "Your Highness?" Gertrude curtsied deeply. "What brings you to my humble domain?" "I merely wished to ensure our new staff member is settling in well." His eyes found Annalise, who kept her head bowed. "How do you find the work, Miss Annalise?" "It suits me well, Your Highness," she whispered, not daring to look up. "You have honest hands and a willing heart," he said gently. "That is worth more than any noble birth." After he left, the whispers grew louder. Word of his visit spread through the palace like wildfire. As Annalise worked through the day, she heard snippets of conversation from passing servants and nobles alike. When evening fell, she stood at a wooden table kneading bread by candlelight. Her arms ached, but the familiar motion brought comfort. The kitchen had grown quiet, except for the crackle of the ovens and the soft sounds of dough being shaped. Voices drifted in from the connecting corridor. Ladies of the court, their silk skirts rustling as they passed. "Did you hear about the scarred peasant girl the prince brought back? How ghastly! I heard she's hideously disfigured. Well, she won't last long. These common folk never do. I give her a fortnight before she's sent packing." Cruel laughter floated back to her. Anneliese's hands stilled in the dough as tears threatened to fall. But she lifted her chin and whispered the prayer her father had taught her in childhood. "Lord, grant me strength when I am weak, and courage when I am afraid." Then she returned to her kneading, pushing the hurt deep down inside where it couldn't touch her. The bread needed tending, and tomorrow would bring another day of work. She would endure. Dawn painted the palace kitchens in pale golden, light as Anneliese's fingers moved mechanically over another silver goblet. Her hands ached from hours of polishing, but she dared not slow her pace. The grand banquet preparations had thrown the entire palace into a whirlwind of activity. These must shine like mirrors. The head cook barked, sweeping past with her arms full of fresh herbs. "The nobles will inspect every piece." Anneliese nodded, dipping her polishing cloth into the paste once more. Around her, the kitchen buzzed like an overturned beehive. Servants rushed back and forth, carrying trays of delicate pastries and roasted meats. The air was thick with the scent of fresh bread and simmering sauces. "Your hands are." Trembling, a gentle voice said behind her. She turned to find Prince Alaric, standing in the shadowed doorway of the storage pantry, his presence both thrilling and terrifying. "Your Highness," she whispered, dropping into a curtsy. "You should not be here." "I came to see how you fare," he said, stepping closer. His eyes held genuine concern. "And to bring you this." From his pocket, he drew a length of blue silk ribbon. Anneliese's breath caught. "I cannot accept such a fine gift." "Please," he insisted, placing it in her work-roughened hand. "It would please me to see you wear it." His fingers lingered against hers for a moment too long. Throughout the following days, Alaric found more reasons to seek her out. He would appear in quiet corners of the kitchen gardens, asking about her village life. Once, he discovered her in the empty still room, grinding herbs, and stayed to listen to her stories of healing remedies learned from her grandmother. His laughter at her quiet observations about palace life made her feel clever and alive in ways she had never known, but such moments came with a price. Lord Stephen's cold eyes seemed to follow her everywhere. One afternoon, she overheard his voice drifting from the council chamber as she scrubbed the floor outside. "The prince spends an unseemly amount of time in the company of that scarred creature," he said, his words dripping with disdain. "It threatens the betrothal negotiations with Lady Beatrice's family. Something must be done." Murmurs of agreement followed, along with mentions of duty and alliances. Anneliese's heart grew heavy, knowing she brought trouble to the man who had shown her such kindness. The pressure on Alaric mounted visibly. She saw it in the tightness around his eyes, the way his shoulders tensed when courtiers approached with talk of the upcoming betrothal. Yet still he sought her out, as if drawn by an invisible thread. That evening, as the sun sank behind the palace towers, Anneliese carried a basket of linens to the washing room. The day's work had left her tired but peaceful. As she sorted the fabrics by candlelight, a melody rose unbidden to her lips, an old song her mother used to sing about love transcending all barriers. Unknown to her, Alaric stood in the shadows of the doorway, transfixed. Her voice, though soft, carried clearly in the quiet room. The candlelight caught the blue ribbon in her hair, his gift, and made her scarred skin glow golden, for all her supposed imperfections. She moved with a grace that came from inner strength rather than courtly. Training his heart ached with a longing he dared not name. The weight of his position, of duty and expectation, pressed down like a physical burden. Yet watching her, hearing her gentle song, he felt a peace he had never known in the glittering ballrooms above. She continued her work, unaware of his presence, while he remained motionless in the shadows. The simple beauty of the moment, her quiet song, the steady movement of her hands, the soft glow of candlelight stood in stark contrast to the elaborate artifice of court life. But duty called, as it always did, and he forced himself to turn away, leaving her to her song and her work. Though his heart remained behind in that humble washing room, the grand banquet hall blazed with a light of 1,000 candles, their flames dancing in crystal chandeliers suspended from gilded ceilings. Musicians played soft melodies from the gallery above, while silk gowns rustled across polished marble floors. The air was thick with the scent of roasted meats, sweet wines, and expensive perfumes. Annalise moved carefully between the tables, her worn shoes silent on the floor as she carried a silver pitcher of wine. She kept her eyes downcast, letting her dark hair shield the scarred side of her face. The nobles paid her no mind. She was merely another servant, invisible in the splendor of the gathering. From the corner of her eye, she caught glimpses of Prince Alaric seated at the high table. He looked resplendent in deep blue velvet, though she noticed the slight tension in his shoulders as he conversed with visiting dignitaries. Lord Stephen, the steward, hovered nearby like a watchful shadow. More wine, a nobleman commanded, thrusting his empty goblet toward her without looking up. Annalise stepped forward, pouring carefully to avoid any drops on the pristine tablecloth as she worked her way closer to the high table. She noticed a servant she didn't recognize, a thin man with restless eyes approaching with a fresh goblet for the prince. Something about his movements seemed wrong, too hurried, too purposeful. She watched as he paused behind a column, and her heart nearly stopped as she saw him slip a white powder into the wine. Time seemed to slow. The poisoner moved toward Prince Alaric, who was deep in conversation with an elderly duke. Without thinking, Annalise rushed forward, just as the suspect servant placed the goblet before the prince. She reached out and snatched it. "Allow me to taste it first." "Your Highness," she said clearly, her voice carrying across the sudden lull in conversation. Before anyone could react, she lifted the goblet to her lips and took a deep swallow. The wine tasted bitter, metallic. The room began to spin almost immediately. She heard the poisoner's footsteps retreating rapidly, saw Alaric's face transform from confusion to horror. Her legs gave way, and the goblet clattered to the floor, red wine spreading like blood across the marble. "Annalise." Alaric's voice cut through the growing darkness. She felt his arms catch her before she hit the ground. Gasps and screams echoed through the hall. "Guards! Seize that man!" Lord Stephen's voice boomed, but it seemed very far away. Alaric cradled her head gently, his blue eyes filled with anguish. "Why?" he whispered. "Why would you do this?" Annalise tried to smile, though her lips felt numb. "Because you saw me as worthy when no one else did." The prince rose to his feet, still supporting her carefully. His voice rang out across the silent hall. "This is the purest soul I have ever known." The assembled nobles stared, struck speechless by the sight of their crowned prince holding a scarred servant girl with such tender care. Physicians rushed forward with their leather bags of instruments. Alaric himself carried her from the hall, ignoring the scandalized whispers that followed. They brought her to her small pallet in the servants' quarters, where the doctors immediately began their work. "Bloodletting will draw out the poison," one declared, preparing his tools. Another called for leeches, while a third mixed herbs with trembling hands. Through the haze of pain and growing fever, Annalise felt Alaric's warm hand clasping hers. A servant tried to suggest he return to his guests, but his response was immediate and firm. "I will not leave her." The candles burned lower as the physicians worked. Annalise drifted between consciousness and darkness, anchored only by the steady pressure of Alaric's hand and the sound of his quiet prayers. Each time her eyes fluttered open, she found him there, his face lined with worry in the flickering light. "Stay with me," he whispered, and though her throat was too dry to respond, she squeezed his hand weakly. In that moment, despite the pain and fear, she felt something she had never dared to feel before. Loved morning light crept through the high windows of the palace infirmary as Anelius's eyelids fluttered open. Her throat burned, and every breath felt like swallowing needles. The white linens surrounding her seemed to glow in the dawn's gentle rays, and the scent of healing herbs hung heavy in the air. "She's awake," whispered a young servant girl who had been keeping vigil. Within moments, the news rippled through the palace like a stone cast in still water. Servants gathered in doorways and corridors, their voices hushed but urgent. The kitchen maid saved His Highness. She drank the poison meant for the prince. Throughout the morning, tokens of gratitude appeared mysteriously by her bedside. Kitchen boys left sprigs of lavender, while chambermaids brought small posies of wildflowers gathered from the palace gardens. Even the children of noble visitors, touched by the tale of her bravery, secretly dropped flower petals on her blanket when their governesses weren't looking. "God bless you, Miss," murmured an elderly cook, pressing a warm bread roll into her trembling hands. "You've got the heart of a lion, you have." But while kindness bloomed below stairs, darkness gathered in the nobles' quarters. Lord Stefan stood before a group of conspiring courtiers, his voice dripping with calculated malice. "Consider, my lords and ladies, how convenient this all appears. A common girl, marked by fire, suddenly rises to save our beloved prince. Surely you see the artifice in this performance." The whispers began to spread like poison through honey. How did she know which cup was tainted? Why was she watching the prince's goblet so closely? Had she orchestrated the entire incident to cast herself as a heroine? Noble faces that had briefly softened with compassion now hardened with suspicion. In gilded chambers, fans snapped shut in anger, and rings flashed on fingers that pointed in accusation. "She must be removed," declared a duchess, her painted lips curling with disdain. "The girl is clearly dangerous." Before Anneliese could fully regain her strength, palace guards burst into the infirmary. Their boots echoed against stone floors as they approached her bed, iron chains rattling in their hands. She did not resist as they roughly pulled her to her feet, though her legs could barely support her weight. "No." Prince Alaric's voice thundered through the chamber as he strode in, his face pale with fury. "I forbid this. She saved my life." Lord Stefan stepped forward, his voice smooth as silk but sharp as a blade. "Your Highness, consider the delicate balance of power. Our allies grow concerned about your attachment to this servant. They question your judgment. Some whisper of rebellion." The prince's hands clenched into fists as the council members gathered around him. "The girl is guilty of nothing but courage," he insisted. But his words fell on deaf ears. "Choose carefully, Your Highness," murmured an elderly counselor. "The peace of the realm hangs by a thread. Would you risk war for a kitchen maid?" Anneliese watched the conflict play across Alaric's face. "My lord," she whispered, her voice still raw from the poison. "Please do not endanger yourself for my sake." Their eyes met across the room, and in that moment, she tried to pour all her understanding, all her love, into that single look. The guards dragged her away, their grip bruising on her arms. Alaric stood, frozen, duty and desire warring in his heart. As chains were locked around her wrists and ankles, the dungeon air hit her like a physical blow, thick with mildew and despair. They threw her into a cell where water trickled down stone walls and rats scurried in dark corners. The iron door clanged shut with terrible finality. Alone in the darkness, Anneliese sank to her knees on the damp stone floor. Her body still ached from the poison, and the chains weighed heavy on her limbs. But as she bowed her head, her prayers were not for herself. "Dear God," she whispered into the darkness, "protect him. Shield him from those who would do him harm. Let my suffering be enough to spare him from further plots. Her words echoed softly against the dungeon walls, a quiet testament to a love that cared nothing for itself and everything for another. Footsteps echoed through the dank corridor of the dungeon, accompanied by the rustle of silk and the soft glow of a lantern. Annalise huddled in the corner of her cell, her thin blanket wrapped tightly around her shoulders against the chill. The approaching light revealed an elegant figure, the Dowager Queen Isolde herself, flanked by a single trusted guard who kept a respectful distance. "Leave us," the Dowager commanded softly. The guard bowed and retreated, though remained within calling distance. Annalise scrambled to her feet, chains rattling. "Your Majesty," she whispered, attempting a curtsy despite her bonds. "I am not worthy of hush, child." The Dowager's voice was gentle as spring rain. She held the lantern higher, studying Annalise's face with eyes that held not disgust but understanding. "I have come to speak with you." Woman to woman, the Queen's fingers moved to the edge of her elaborate headdress, carefully lifting aside a portion of the delicate lace veil. In the lantern light, Annalise glimpsed what lay beneath a network of small, pitted scars across the older woman's temple and cheek. "Smallpox," the Dowager explained quietly. "I was 16 when it struck. The physicians saved my life, but could not spare my face. For years, I hid behind veils and powder, enduring the whispers, the barely concealed revulsion." She reached through the cell bars to touch Annalise's scarred hand. "I know the weight of society's cruel gaze, dear child." Tears welled in Annalise's eyes. "Your Majesty survived and became a queen because one person saw past my scars to my heart, just as my grandson sees past yours." The Dowager's grip tightened. "I will not stand idle while another scarred soul is condemned for her courage. I shall speak for you at the trial, but Your Majesty, the nobles, let them gossip. I have weathered far worse storms than wagging tongues." The Dowager's smile held steel beneath its gentleness. "Already, word of your imprisonment has spread. This morning, a group arrived from your village." Annalise's heart leaped. From the village, indeed. Children now grown who remember a brave miller's daughter running into flames to save them. Their parents, too, bearing written testimonies to your character. The Dowager's eyes sparkled. "They have traveled for days, sleeping in ditches and begging rides on hay carts, all to speak truth before the court." Fresh tears spilled down Annalise's cheeks. "I never thought. They shunned me for so long. Sometimes it takes darkness to reveal who truly stands with us." The Dowager squeezed her hand once more before releasing it. "Take heart, child. You are not alone." As the Queen departed, her silk skirts whispering against the stone floor, Annalise felt warmth bloom in her chest despite the dungeon's chill. For the first time since her imprisonment, hope flickered like a candle flame in her heart. Days passed in a blur of darkness and prayer. Then, on a crisp morning, guards came to escort her to the great hall. The chains around her wrists felt heavier than ever as they led her through torchlit corridors. The great hall blazed with hundreds of candles in crystal chandeliers, their light catching on jewels and silks as nobles filled the galleries. Their whispers rustled like dead leaves as Annalise entered. She kept her head bowed, focusing on each step, refusing to meet the hungry stares. Lord Stefan stood near the throne, his face a mask of stern disapproval. Yet beside him sat the Dowager Queen, straight-backed and serene, her presence a silent challenge to any who would question her authority. And there, gathered near the back of the hall, stood familiar faces from her village-weathered farmers, shopkeepers, and yes, the children she had saved. Now grown, but with eyes that held no shame in meeting hers. The chains clinked as guards positioned her before the assembled court. Annalise lifted her face at last, not in defiance, but with quiet dignity, ready to face whatever judgment awaited. The candles flickered above, casting dancing shadows across the faces of those who would decide her fate. The first rays of dawn crept through the high windows of the great hall as church bells tolled their solemn melody across the city. Annalise stood before the assembled court. Her worn servants dress a stark contrast to the sea of silk and velvet surrounding her. Torchlight flickered across her scarred features, casting shadows that seemed to dance across her face. Yet she held herself with quiet dignity. Lord Stefan the steward stepped forward first, his voice dripping with contempt. "We stand here today to judge a most grievous crime. This creature," he gestured dismissively toward Annalise, "has conspired against the crown itself, using trickery and poison to gain influence over our beloved prince." Murmurs rippled through the gathered nobility. Several ladies whispered behind their fans, their jeweled fingers pointing at Annalise's scars. Yet she remained still, her eyes fixed straight ahead, refusing to let tears fall. "She is nothing but a schemer," declared Lady Vernon, her voice carrying across the hall. "A peasant who dared to rise above her station through the most despicable means." Before another noble could speak, a commanding voice cut through the accusations. "I will speak now." The Dowager Queen Isolde rose from her seat, her silver hair gleaming in the torchlight. The hall fell silent as she descended the dais steps with measured grace. "You speak of stations and worth," the Dowager said, her voice clear and strong. "You judge this girl by her scars, believing them a mark of shame." She paused before the assembly, then did something unprecedented. She began to undo the elaborate lace that covered her right arm. "Your Majesty." Lord Stefan stepped forward, alarmed. This is most irregular silence. The single word carried such authority that the steward fell back. Chastened, the Dowager pulled back her sleeve, revealing skin marked with old pockmarks, silvery in the torchlight. Gasps echoed through the hall. "I too bear scars," she declared. "Smallpox marked me in my youth. Does this make me unworthy of the crown I wore for 30 years? A profound silence fell over the assembly. Even the most hardened courtiers looked away, abashed. At that moment, the great doors creaked open. A group of common folk entered, weather-worn farmers, mothers with children clinging to their skirts, and young men with calloused hands. They had traveled for days from Annalise's village, their clothes dusty from the road. "Speak," the Dowager commanded them. "Tell us what you know of this girl." A young boy, no more than 12, stepped forward first. "She saved my life," he said, his voice trembling but clear. "When the mill caught fire 3 years past, I was trapped inside. The flames were everywhere." He swallowed hard. "She ran in when no one else would. Carried me out, she did, though the fire burned her something awful. And my daughter," a woman added, tears in her eyes. "Annalise went back in for her too. And Thomas's boy after that." One by one, they stepped forward. Parents, children, neighbors, each telling their tale of Annalise's courage, of how she had thrown herself into the inferno again and again until all were saved. Thinking nothing of her own safety, the nobles shifted uncomfortably in their seats as the stories continued. The righteousness of their accusations began to waver in the face of such simple, honest testimony. Prince Alaric, who had been required to sit in silence as heir and witness, suddenly rose to his feet. His face was pale but determined. "I have heard enough," he declared, his voice ringing through the hall. "You ask how I could love one of common birth. I ask how I could not love one of such uncommon valor." The word love sent shockwaves through the assembly. Ladies swooned, lords thundered in protest, and chaos erupted in the great hall. "This is an outrage." Lord Stefan shouted above the din. "Your Highness, think of your duty to the crown." Silence. The Dowager commanded again, but even her authority could not fully quell the uproar. Some nobles were on their feet, crying scandal and disgrace, while others had bowed their heads, moved by the morning's revelations. Finally, the Lord Chancellor stepped forward, raising his staff of office. The hollow boom of it striking the floor gradually restored order. "This matter requires careful consideration," he announced gravely. "The trial will be suspended until tomorrow, when His Majesty will deliver the royal judgment." The bells tolled again, marking the hour as guards stepped forward to escort Annalise back to her cell. But now, as she walked past the assembled nobility, fewer faces showed contempt. More than one lady dabbed at her eyes with a handkerchief, and several of the younger lords bowed their heads in respect as she passed. Prince Alaric paced his chambers as midnight oil burned low in its silver holder. Shadows danced across the rich tapestries adorning his walls, matching the turmoil in his heart. His most trusted advisers huddled near the hearth, their faces drawn with concern in the flickering light. "Your Highness," Lord Blackthorn pleaded, his elderly voice trembling, "think of the alliances we would lose. The northern kingdoms would withdraw their support. Trade routes would close. The people would suffer. The crown has endured for 8 centuries, added Lord Pembroke, clutching his ceremonial staff. "Surely you cannot risk it all for a kitchen maid, scarred and common as she is." Alaric stopped his pacing, turning to face them with steel in his eyes. "And what worth has a crown built upon lies? What honor can there be in condemning an innocent soul who saved my life?" But the betrothal contract, Lord Blackthorn began. "Enough." Alaric's voice was quiet but firm. He strode to his writing desk, pulling out fresh parchment and his quill. The scratching of his pen filled the tense silence as he composed his letter, each word measured and final. "My lords," he said as he finished, reaching for his signet ring, "you speak of duty to the crown. But my first duty is to truth and justice." Red wax dripped onto the folded letter, and he pressed his royal seal into it with unwavering purpose. The advisers watched in horror as he handed the letter to his most trusted messenger. "Ride at first light," Alaric commanded. "Deliver this to Lady Catherine personally. She deserves to know why I cannot honor our betrothal." As his chamber door closed behind the dejected lords, Alaric stood at his window, watching the stars wheel above the sleeping city. In his heart, he knew tomorrow would change everything. When morning came, the great hall filled with nobles, their whispers like rustling leaves as Alaric strode to his place before the throne. Annalise stood to one side, still in chains, her guards watching warily. Sunlight streamed through the high windows, catching the tears that slipped silently down her scarred cheeks. "My lords and ladies," Alaric's voice rang out clear and strong, "I stand before you to speak of worth and honor." He moved to the central table where the betrothal contract lay, its golden seals gleaming. "You would have me sign this, binding myself to a political marriage while condemning an innocent soul to darkness." Lord Stefan stepped forward, his face tight with barely contained rage. "Your Highness, think carefully before you." "I have thought of nothing else," Alaric cut him off. He lifted the contract, holding it high for all to see. "This document represents everything wrong with our realm, the elevation of politics over truth, of appearance over virtue, with deliberate movements." He tore the parchment in 2, then 4, then 8 pieces. Gasps echoed through the hall. Someone screamed. The pieces fluttered to the marble floor like autumn leaves. "Any throne," Alaric declared, his voice carrying to every corner, "built upon cruelty and falsehood is unworthy of rule. Any crown that would condemn innocence for convenience deserves to fall." He crossed to where Annalise stood, her eyes wide with disbelief. Taking her chained hands in his, he lifted them to his lips and kissed them reverently before the entire court. "These hands saved my life," he proclaimed. "These scars came from saving children. If such nobility of spirit makes her unworthy, then perhaps we have all forgotten the true meaning of worth. The council members trembled, some reaching for their ceremonial swords. But at that moment, a great cheer rose from beyond the palace walls. The common folk had gathered in their hundreds. Word of Anelius's bravery and the prince's defiance spreading like wildfire through the city streets. A guard rushed forward with keys, unlocking Anelius's chains. They fell to the floor with a clang that echoed through the suddenly silent hall. Alaric took her hand gently in his, and together they walked toward the great doors. As they swung open, sunlight poured over them in a golden cascade. The bells of the city began to peal, their joyous sound mixing with the acclaim of the people gathering. Below, the cathedral's ancient stones glowed in the morning light as hundreds of candles flickered along the nave. Tapestries hung from the high rafters, and fresh spring flowers adorned every pillar. Noble families filed into their places, their faces a mixture of resignation and curiosity. The common folk packed the back of the church, their excitement barely contained. When the great doors opened, Anneliese stood tall in a gown of ivory silk, simple yet elegant. Her scarred face was bare to all, no veil to hide behind. She had chosen this to face her new life with the same courage that had earned her these marks. Her father, the humble miller, walked beside her with tears of pride in his eyes. The dowager queen had insisted on adding small pearls to Annelies's hair, saying softly, "Let them see that true beauty needs no mask." These gleamed now like morning dew as Anneliese took her first steps down the aisle. Prince Alaric waited at the altar, his breath catching at the sight of her. His ceremonial sword hung at his side, but his eyes were soft with love. The archbishop stood ready with his gilded prayer book, holy incense rising in delicate spirals around them. "My lords and ladies, good people of the realm," the archbishop's voice resonated through the sacred space. "We gather to witness a union blessed by God, though questioned by men." The ceremony proceeded with ancient solemnity. When the time came for vows, Alaric spoke with clear conviction that rang to the rafters. "I take thee not despite thy scars, but because of the courage and sacrifice they represent. In them I see the true face of nobility, one that puts others before self, that bears pain to save innocence, that shows strength in gentleness." Tears slipped down Annelies's cheeks as she pledged her own love, her voice steady and sure. The wedding feast that followed broke with centuries of tradition. In the great hall, tables were arranged not by rank, but mixed together, servants beside barons, merchants alongside dukes. Children who had survived the mill fire years ago sat near the high table, their joy infectious as evening painted the sky in purple and gold. The newlywed couple slipped away to the castle gardens. Rose bushes lined the paths, their perfume sweet in the gathering dusk. Alaric led Anneliese to a quiet corner where a stone bench sat beneath an ancient oak. "My love," he whispered, tracing the line of her scars with tender fingers, "these marks led me to true love. They showed me a heart braver than any knight's, a spirit nobler than any bloodline." Anneliese smiled, no longer turning away to hide her face. "And your love showed me that these scars need not be my shame, but my strength." The great bells of the cathedral began to toll, their deep voices carrying across the city. As twilight settled over the garden like a blessing, their sound spoke of more than just a union. They heralded a new dawn for the kingdom, where worth would be measured by the content of one's heart rather than the smoothness of one's face. Thanks for taking a moment to feel with me. If this story reminded you of what matters, hit subscribe. I'll be here tomorrow, continuing our story.